you.
Thank you, Baba. Murandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksurunminitam Dina Taismai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Mano Bhistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dunati Svapadandikam Bandeham Sri Guru Suyuta Parakamalam Sri Guru Vaishnavam Scha Sri Rupam Sagrajatam Sahagana Paraganatam Vidantam Sajivam Sadvaitam Savadutam Parijana Sahitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shiva Shakam Vitamscha Hey Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopeja Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhi Vandavanishwari Vrishabhanu Shudadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanchakapatru Vasya Kripa Sindhu Devacha Patidanam Bhavanibhyo Vaishnavibhyo Namo Namaha Sri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shivashani Gaura Bhakti Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Ananta Koti Vaishnava Vrinda ki jai.
Jai.
I read a wonderful pastime. Might have been brought up sometime in a class there, but these two first verses of our Mangalacharna, Om Agyanti Manandasya, and then the prayer to Rupa Goswami. Jamuna in her diary brings up a story that when Srila Prabhupada came back from India after his stroke in San Francisco, that's when he first began asking the devotees to make clothing, sew clothing for the deities. Of course, the deities there were Jagannath, Baladev, and Subhadra. And there was one Mataji there, her name's Harsharani, and Prabhupada asked her to start sewing outfits for the deities, and she had no idea at all how to do that. She was not a seamstress and didn't have a clue. And Prabhupada told her, you just recite these two verses whenever you have an impossible task to perform for your spiritual master, Krishna. You recite these two verses. Om Agyanti Marandasya Gyananjana Salakaya Chaksurunminitam Yena Taismai Sri Gurave Namaha Sri Chaitanya Manobhistam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Svapadandikam. And Krishna will help you do the impossible. That's a wonderful lesson Prabhupada gave the devotees. So today, I missed the class this morning. I apologize. But today is a very special day on the Vaishnav calendar. It's the Tirobhav or disappearance day of Srila Ramanujacharya. And these days are celebrated in many different ways because it's described that the different devotees or acharyas, great spiritual masters, on their disappearance and appearance days, they make themselves very much available to the devotees. In other words, they're very much inclined to give their mercy and give blessings and benedictions. So on these days, devotees take time to glorify their pastimes, their teachings, their qualities, and to fervently pray for some mercy, some blessings. So that's why I figured it'd be a good idea to talk a little bit about Ramanujacharya. Krishna has, in many, many different ways, made arrangements for the conditioned souls to be delivered from this material world. And of course, he comes internally as the super soul in everyone's heart, but most of us have turned that channel off. We don't like listening to that station. So he comes externally as a spiritual master, and the spiritual master comes in what is known as disciplic succession. And it's described in the Vedic literatures that for the Vaishnavas, for the devotees, there are 4 different what are called Sampradayas. These are lines of spiritual masters. You can say they're like rivers flowing from the spiritual world, filled with mercy and divine instructions on how to go back home, back to Godhead. And these sampradayas are spread throughout the universe because they originate with divine personalities. The first is actually the first Sampradaya was begun by Lakshmi herself, the goddess of fortune. Narayan began that, preached to or gave the instructions to Lakshmi. She gave it to Mu and Shri and different potencies, and then on to Garuda and Anantadev, and then gradually coming down through the different yugas. And in Kali Yuga, Lakshmi Sampradaya is represented by Ramanujacharya. The other Sampradaya is from Lord Brahma himself, the creator of this universe, and that is coming, that's the line we're in, the Brahma Madhva Gaudiya Sampradaya. You have one from Lord Shiva, and in Kali Yuga, the Acharya is Vishnu Swami. And then the last one started was from the Chaturshan or four Kumaras. And in Kali Yuga, the Acharya is Nimbarka. So these are the four great Acharyas in the age of Kali on this planet: Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Vishnu Swami, and Nimbarka. And, he's known as Ramanujacharya. And Acharya is used in different ways. But what we're talking about here is a Sampradaya Acharya, and that's very, very significant, because these Acharyas, in general, Acharya means someone who's following very strictly the previous Acharyas. He's not inventing anything new. He's carrying the transcendental information. There's no reason to improve upon or change or manipulate the divine instructions coming from Krishna. They're perfect and complete. So the Acharya is very careful to bring the same message that's being handed down since time immemorial. It says he establishes a line in the sense of maybe a movement within that movement, or renews a very strong flow of devotional service. Because we all know what happens in due course of time. Things start to fall apart. It's called the law of entropy in the material world. Whatever you try to put together, time just tears it apart in many different ways. So we see that from time to time. That's why Krishna says, Yada yada hi dharmasya glanir bhavati bharata. From time to time, he comes to reestablish the principles of religion. So he may come himself, which he says, but he also sends his devotees to breathe new life into the teachings and the preaching of Krishna consciousness. It's the very nature of this world, material world, that these things get covered. So that's one of the activities of the Sampradaya Acharyas. This material world is not a place for Krishna consciousness. And in some writings, it's described that the path back home, back to Godhead is just covered with all kinds of thorns. And it's a very difficult path, but the Acharyas are the great souls who, out of compassion, not caring that it's so difficult, they clear that path for us and make it very easy so we can see the way back home, back to Godhead. We see that in Srila Prabhupada's life. Came to the West, and the path he chalked out through the International Society for Krishna Consciousness makes going back home, back to Godhead very easy. And this is due to their compassion for all unconditioned souls. And they're willing to tolerate all the different obstacles that are always there when it comes time for preaching Krishna consciousness, especially on a big scale. When you want to turn the tide and make thousands and thousands and thousands of people Krishna conscious, it's a big endeavor. So, and we're talking about Ramanujacharya. Of course, the biggest obstacle he confronted was the fact that impersonalism, the teachings of Sankaracharya were very prominent, had a very great stronghold in the minds of the people of India, and he had to turn that. So that was his biggest obstacle, you could say. But also, as I pointed out in class the other day, whenever you're preaching pure Krishna consciousness, you always get enemies. Not that the devotee sees anyone as an enemy, but people will see the devotees as enemies. And I imagine you did you read different pastimes this morning of Ramanujacharya?
Yes. Bhajanarayan Swami, he covered some things about Yadava Prakash.
Okay, so Yadava Prakash is the first person who manifested great envy of Ramanujacharya, who was his teacher. And at a young age, when he realized that Ramanujacharya would be a great proponent of Krishna consciousness, of personalism, he conspired to kill him. He was not successful. And later on, he actually became a disciple of Ramanujacharya. His mother told him to become a disciple. All glories to mom. She told him, because later in life, he was so miserable because of the great offense he had committed against Ramanujacharya. He eventually became a disciple, and he wrote a very significant book in that line. And then later on, he was back in his 80s at that time, he passed away. You might have heard the story about the head pujari at the temple of Sri Rangam, that his position, he was using that position for money and power and prestige. And he could see that Ramanujacharya was cleaning up the temple there in the deity service and practices. And he was thinking, this is horrible. I got to get rid of him. And he tried to poison him twice. First time he did it, he had his wife put some poison in rice and invited Ramanuja for lunch, but she told him not to eat it and go away. And then when that failed, he poisoned the Charnamrita. See that Charnamrita right next to you, Balaram? He poisoned the Charnamrita. Be careful.
Yes, right next to me.
He poisoned the Charnamrita and gave it to Ramanujacharya. And Ramanujacharya just said, okay, we'll leave it up to Krishna. And he drank it and nothing happened. Actually, it says he was in such ecstasy when he was leaving the temple that the priest thought he was staggering, being poisoned. But the next day he reappeared from Mangalartik, and the pujari realized his folly and fell at his feet and begged forgiveness, and he forgave him. Actually, I'm going to go on. So this particular Sampradaya is called the Sri Sampradaya. They're worshippers of Lakshmi, Narayan, and Sita and Ram. When you visit the different temples of this Sampradaya in South India, you'll see those are the main deities: Narayan, Lakshmi Narayan, and Sita and Ram. And Ramanujacharya appeared in 1017 and disappeared around 1137. So he was present 125 years on this planet. And his movement, it says he made the number of 700 sannyasis, 1,200 brahmacharis, thousands of householder devotees, 300 keti amarais, which means those are single women who become ascetics, established 74 temples or centers for Sri Vaishnavism throughout India. And of course, his biggest contribution was his commentary on Vedanta Sutra called the Sri Bhashya, his commentary on the Bhagavad Gita and other different literatures. And he traveled throughout India. There are many pastimes of his travels throughout India, establishing Vaishnavism and deity worship throughout India. His main objective, though, at that time was to defeat the impersonalism that was very prominent in India. Not an easy task. His philosophy was known as Vishishta Dvaita Vada. Dvaita Vada means non-duality. That's a philosophy in impersonalism. In other words, everything's one. There's no duality. But his Vishishta Dvaita means purified oneness. And what that refers to is that, yes, everything's one, but within that oneness, there's variety. And he spoke extensively on the three varieties, the three aspects of the absolute truth: the Supreme Lord, Ishvara, Chit, the soul, and Achit, which means this material world. So that's Bhagavad Gita. What's the relationship between Ishvara, the spirit soul, and the material world? And he preached Dasya Rasa, becoming the servant of Lakshmi and Narayan. So as far as the connection between his Sampradaya and our Sampradaya and the movement of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, it says that Lord Chaitanya, he took two principles from each of these two Sampradayas, Vaishnava Sampradayas, into his preaching. And in the, what is that book? The Sri Navadvip Mahatmya, it describes how Lord Chaitanya actually met all of these four acharyas of the Sampradayas, and they also took birth in Chaitanya Lila. So I couldn't find who Madhvacharya took birth as, but Ramanujacharya took birth as a devotee named Ananta. Vishnu Swami became Vallabha Bhatta, and Nimbarka Swami was Keshava Kashmiri, the great Pandit that came and Chaitanya Mahaprabhu defeated in his youth. So the two principles that Lord Chaitanya took from each of these sampradayas, I'll tell you what those are, and I'll finish up with the ones from the Sri Sampradaya, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So from the Nimbarka or Kumara Sampradaya, the two principles that Lord Chaitanya took were the need of taking exclusive shelter of Radharani and the exalted mood of the gopis' love for Sri Krishna or Gopi Baba. From the Rudra Sampradaya, and that's Vallabha Bhatta or Vishnu Swami, the two principles were the sentiment of total dependence on Krishna and the path of spontaneous devotional service of Raga Marga. You'll see that's in the Vallabha Bhatta Sampradaya, is very prominent there in Vrindavan. From the Madhva Sampradaya, the one we are in, he took the principles of completely defeating the Mayavadi philosophy. That was the big one there. Madhvacharya's movement, which came after Ramanujacharya, was very, very powerful in preaching against impersonalism. And also the second principle is the worship of the deity of Krishna and understanding that the deity is eternal. Krishna Murti Sevana. Now from the Ramanuja Sampradaya, which we're talking about, the two principles were the concept of unalloyed devotion free from karma and jnana and service to the devotees, Vaishnav Seva or Bhaktajan Seva. So these two principles, now Rupa Goswami, he says in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, his definition of pure devotional service, which is always quoted, is that Anyabhilasita Shunyam Jnana Karma Anabritam Krishnanustilanam Bhaktir Uchate. That pure devotional service is devoid of karma and jnana. It's unalloyed. Generally, one's religious sentiment is mixed with something else. 99.9% of all religious sentiment is pretty much mixed with something else. And one way to understand this is that in mixed devotional service or religiosity, God is not the object, Krishna is not the object, it's what we can get from him. In pure devotional service, Krishna is the object. And devotional activities or religion that's not pure, it's what we can get from God. So Prabhupada had this term unalloyed devotion or unalloyed pure devotional service. And you've heard the story before that when Prabhupada first arrived in Boston, he saw a sign on the wharf there. And later on, Brahmananda, I remember him telling the story that when they got the first bus in the movement for preaching, who was it? Anyways, it'll come to me, the name of the devotee. They all piled into the bus, and Prabhupada had them go from the temple in Boston all the way through the streets of Boston. Prabhupada was telling them left here, right here. He actually knew how to get there all the way down to the pier where Prabhupada came in, the Commonwealth Pier there. And they were walking along, and the Prabhupada took his cane and raised it in the sky and up in the air, and they all followed where his cane was pointing, and it was Unalloyed Steel Company. And Prabhupada again made the point that unalloyed, that means it's completely pure. So Prabhupada gave that example. So most people, they think of religion or the reason for performing religious activities is for God to give me something. That's called fruit of activities. That's your karma. And gyan means really leads to speculation or impersonalism. So these aren't the goals of devotional service. And the Bhagavatam, Kaitava Dharma, it kicks it out. Krishna in the Bhagavad Gita, Sarvam Dharmam Pritya Jamamekam Sharanam Braja. So Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, that verse is quoted, Bhukti Mukti Siddhi Kami, Sakalaya Santa. that one will never be peaceful as long as one is absorbed in bhakti, mukti, and siddhi. That means bhakti means trying to enjoy in this material world. Mukti means liberation. Siddhi means yogic perfections. None of these things are the real essence of spirituality. It's actually unalloyed, pure devotional service. And Ramanujacharya was preaching this very, very strongly over and over again in his preaching, in his literatures, and so on. This is the real message of the Shastras, pure, unalloyed devotional service to Krishna. There's two verses at the end of the 11th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. I'll just read the translations. But again, Krishna is confirming this. My dear Arjuna, only by undivided devotional service can I be understood as I am, standing before you, and can thus be seen directly. Only in this way can you enter into the mysteries of my understanding. So that's the secret. Unalloyed, pure devotional service will actually, Krishna manifests himself to the devotees. He says, my dear Arjuna, he who engages in my pure devotional service, free from the contaminations of fruitive activities and mental speculation, he who works for me, who makes me the supreme goal of his life, and who is friendly to every living being, he certainly comes to me. So Krishna himself confirms this, what he's saying. Now, the other aspect of Ramanujacharya's teachings that was brought in by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and stressed was the Vaishnav Seva, service to the Lord's devotees. That is a secret for approaching Krishna. Prabhupada would sometimes say Krishna is far away. Krishna is very far away, but the devotees are here, they're close. So that's the secret for becoming Krishna conscious. You cannot approach Krishna directly. Krishna says in the Adi Purana, he tells Arjuna that if someone says he's my devotee, he's not my devotee. But if someone says he's a devotee of my devotee, that's who I accept as my devotee. So this is the universal principle, and actually is not so easily understood or practiced. So it's something we all have to work on. Now, every morning we sing Yasya Prasada, Bhagavat Prasada, Yasya Prasada, Nagati Katopi. So by the mercy of the spiritual master, one gets the mercy of Krishna, and without the blessings of the spiritual master, one doesn't make any advancement at all. So it's serving the Lord's devotees. The dearest thing to Krishna's heart are his devotees. So one has to be, there's two sides to that, obviously. But the positive side is by serving devotees in any way we can, we endear ourselves to Krishna. And if we offend devotees, that doesn't go very well on our report cards. Krishna gets pretty upset with that. In fact, everything becomes blocked whenever there are offenses. In fact, that is known as the Hati Mata, right? The mad elephant offense. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu gave the example that if a mad elephant rushes into a garden and stomps on everything, rips everything up, then devastation. What are you going to do? It's an interesting story. I remember hearing this. I don't know who was telling it, but it was one of the devotees on Padayatra, how elephants have a very, very good memory. And they're telling a story about the elephant who, I know this elephant because he almost stepped on me back in 1980. I don't know what it was, 81 or 82. I went on Padayatra for a little while with this devotee Pradumna from San Diego. And I was sitting on the bank of a river, and the elephant was bathing, and then came out, and everyone screamed and yelled for me to get out of the way because the elephant was coming. He just didn't stop for anyone. But this elephant stopped at someone's house on the way as the Padayatra was going, and there was some nice little sugarcane plants there, or banana plants, and the elephant just took its trunk and was uprooting them. And the lady came out and was hitting the elephant, trying to get him away, hitting the elephant, hurting the elephant. And the devotees just, led the elephant away and hurt the elephant and went on their way. And then the devotee says, a year later, or a few years later, they came the same way and the same house, and the lady was out there and the elephant hit her. So he remembered that situation, but he was just pulling up all the plants, having a good time. So Hatimata, one has to be very, very careful. If anything can hurt our devotional service, it's not treating devotees properly. And the neophyte devotee only sees Krishna, but the Madhyamadhikari, the middle devotee, begins seeing the devotees and being very, very happy in the association of devotees, and understanding that Vaishnav Seva is the key to advancing in Krishna consciousness. And there is one story in the pastimes of Ramanujacharya that there was a Brahmin, a very nice, pious Brahmin, came to Ramanujacharya, to his ashram, and said that he wanted to stay and get the association and learn from Ramanujacharya, and if there's any kind of service he could do every single day. And Ramanuja told him, yes, I want you to stay here. And what I want to do is every day when I come back from my noon duties, I want to take the water that has washed your feet and pour it on my head. So this is he was a sannyasi, big acharya of a big spiritual movement, and he's telling this simple Brahmin that's the service he wants him to render, is to provide the water from washing his feet so he could pour it on his head. So what to do? So the Brahmin said, well, you're asking me. So he stayed there, and Ramanujacharya every day would come and take some of the water that had washed the Brahmin's feet and pour it on his head, just to show how important offering respect to and worshiping the devotees is. And there's a pastime there where one day Ramanujacharya didn't come back during the day. He was busy preaching, so he came back late at night, and the Brahmin was still standing there. And he said, why didn't you take rest or take prasad? And he said, this is my daily service. I couldn't do that. So Ramanujacharya took the water, sprinkled it on his head, and blessed the Brahmin. So the final pastimes of Ramanujacharya, again, he lived to be 125. For 125 years, he was present. The last 60 of those years, he was in Sri Rangam, daily preaching to the devotees. And it's described near the end of his life, when he understood that it was time to go, he started giving some indication and preaching about the fact that he was leaving. His disciples were heartbroken and devastated, just contemplating the imminent disappearance of their spiritual master. So they asked him if they could make a murti, if we could make a murti of Ramanujacharya. And this way, by worshiping that murti, they'd always feel his presence. So he said, okay. And they called expert sculptor. And for 3 days, the sculptor worked on a beautiful murti of Ramanujacharya who's sitting at an asana. You go to Sri Rangam, they'll show you this beautiful murti of Ramanujacharya. And when it was completed, Ramanujacharya went right up to the murti and breathed on his head, on his forehead. And he said he entered that murti, and it is actually non-different from him. And when that was done, he just laid down with his lap on one of his devotees, his head in one devotee's lap, his feet on the other devotee's lap. And he was meditating on his spiritual master's shoes. His spiritual master was Mahapurna. And he left this world just meditating on the lotus feet of his spiritual master. And that's how he disappeared from this world. Now, the last thing I'd like to do, if it's okay with you, is that there are some wonderful instructions. You can call them final instructions, if you like, of Ramanujacharya, taken from one of his books. And I guess it's translated, it's called the Prapanamrita, which means the nectar of surrender. So I'll read just the English. It's about 10 or 15 of these wonderful short instructions about devotional service. So if that's okay. So these are a few of his instructions. And if you read in some other books, some of these are contained in his final instructions to his disciples. So the first one is to always serve your spiritual master and other Vaishnavas by treating them with equal respect, and to have full faith in the words of the previous acharyas. Number two, do not spend your days and nights serving your senses. Except for spiritual literatures, all other literatures are of no value. Number three, whatever love and devotion you have for chanting the holy names of the Supreme Lord, may you now have the same love and devotion for glorifying the names of his devotees. Next one, take shelter of the lotus feet of a Mahabhagavata. It's the only means whereby one can obtain the Supreme Lord. Knowing this fact, you should follow his orders with firm determination. A wise person is ruined because of his attachment for material enjoyment. By giving up the service of Lord Vishnu and the Vaishnavas, every human being is ruined. Do not consider service to the Vaishnavas as a means, but rather always consider it the goal. In other words, if I serve the devotees, one day I'll get to Krishna. No, it's the goal. To think that by serving Vaishnavas, one can achieve other fruits is to consider Vaishnav Seva as a means. And to think that due to heaps of pious activities, one obtains Vaishnav Seva is to consider it the goal. Wonderful instruction. Never hanker after luxurious items, such as flowers, sandalwood paste, and betel nuts. So when you think of luxurious items, is that what you think of? Flowers, sandalwood paste, and betel nuts. You should accept only those things that have been offered to the Supreme Lord. Do not be astonished while hearing the glorification of the demigods. Do not feel happy while seeing the devotees. Engaged in glorifying the holy names of Vishnu and the Vaishnavas is certainly an offense. So whenever you see devotees glorifying the Lord and chanting, one should always be very, very happy. This is an interesting one. It says the birth, sleep, and idleness of Vaishnavas are not to be disclosed. After seeing such things, do not talk about them to anyone. I'll read that again. The birth, sleep, and idleness of Vaishnavas are not to be disclosed. After seeing such things, do not talk about them to anyone. If a Vaishnava approaches you and offers obeisances saying, I am your servant, then do not disregard him. If you do so, you will commit a grave offense. Do not consider me as being equal to Vaishnavas. If you accidentally come in contact with materialistic people, you should immediately bathe with your clothes on and then drink some water that has washed the feet of the Vaishnava. You know, I was told that in the Radharaman temple in Vrindavan, daily they sweep the floor and then they collect all the dust and they keep it in a container. And I don't know if it's near the altar where it is, but whenever one is in difficulty, maybe materially and spiritually, it's described that they go and take some of that dust, put it on their head, because that's the dust taken from all the feet of the devotees who have come to worship Radharaman and glorify Radharaman. So, next, excuse me. Never consider the remnants of Lord Hari's food, which are pure and which relieve all of one's sinful reactions, to be contaminated. Never live with people who are very attached to their bodies. Even if hypocrites who are fond of material enjoyment put on the marks and symbols of a Vaishnava, one should still not live with them. If you are chastised by a Vaishnava, just sit silently and do not think that there has been any harm. I guess managers have to be careful not to use that one, right? But anyways, that's how one should think. If you're chastised by a Vaishnava, just sit silently and do not think there's been any harm. And the last one on the list here is knowing very well about the worship of Vaishnavas and about the procedures for worshiping the Supreme Lord, and knowing very well that offending Vaishnavas is more serious than disregarding Lord Vishnu, And knowing that the water that has washed the lotus feet of Vaishnavas is more sanctified than the water that has washed the lotus feet of Lord Vishnu, you should carefully and sincerely serve the Vaishnavas. So those are his instructions. So Acharya means one who sets the example. Acharya means one whose teachings are empowered to Vishnu Margam Pradarshaya, light up the path, back home, back to Godhead. So, of course, we have so many acharyas and devotees and saintly persons who are very, very kindly helping us on our path back home, back to Godhead. Ramanujacharya is one great, powerful personality in that line, and just taking some time today to meditate on his teachings and the teachings, specific teachings that Lord Chaitanya felt were very, very important from his Sampradaya to introduce into the movement of the Yuga Dharma, spreading Krishna consciousness throughout the Kali Yuga, throughout the world. So that's very wonderful. So I'm going to end here. I hope I haven't spoken too long. If there are any questions or comments, I can take them at this time. Otherwise, take prasad.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that one about the birth and the sleep.
Yeah.
And that one about, maybe you could, comment on that some more. Specifically, what did it say? The idleness?
Three things: the devotee's birth, sleep, and idleness. In other words, these are three things you can involve with. Oh, this Vaishnav, he's not from a very elevated family. Just like Prabhupada says, sometimes they refer to Haridas Thakur as Yavana Haridas. It's very offensive. A devotee is transcendental, or devotee is sleeping. So to criticize a devotee for taking rest or something, and idleness sometimes. In other words, one has to be very, very careful not to, especially if one's not in a position to find fault in the devotees of the Lord. And these are three areas where it's very easy for the mind to go there and try to find some fault. One has to be very, very careful. And these are, sometimes it's an easy way to misunderstand what a devotee is doing and so on. So one has to be very, very careful in these different areas. So just keep it to yourself, especially if it's not your position. In Kali Yuga, we're all from very, very low backgrounds. So rare we're going to find a Vaishnava in Kali Yuga is coming from an exalted family and so on. So I guess we're all in that same boat. But these are three areas where one can easily find some fault if they want to, and don't do it. Don't do it. Okay. So, does that answer your question? What do you think?
Yes, thank you. Yeah.
In general, it says that you shouldn't criticize another devotee unless there are two principles. One, you're very, very, very close to that devotee, a very close associate and friend, and your words will be taken. Next is if you happen to be the authority. If you're not in those two positions, then what are you doing? You are entering into a very dangerous situation there. So one has to be very, very careful about that. And that's why Ramanujacharya, he stressed, this is one principle he stressed, and there are many different pastimes with his devotees, his sannyasis, his householders, who he took initiation from, showing the exalted position of the devotees and always glorifying the devotees and making sure they're very happy, living together, and always in the service mood of rendering service to the devotees, to each other. If that can be accomplished, then one feels very Krishna conscious, and the whole atmosphere becomes surcharged with Krishna consciousness. So, just like another thing is, it says Ramachandra Puri. Two things he found fault with the eating habits and the sleeping habits of the Vaishnavas in Puri. And he always criticized them for those two things. And, he created situations where he would feed them too much and they would oversleep. And so they go, they ate too much and they sleep too much. But he was the one who created the situation. So that's another example of someone who didn't follow this teaching of Ramanujacharya. So, anything else? All good?
What was Ramanujacharya it's this disciple that, well, he wasn't a disciple, but he was a man. He was like very attached to a woman.
Became a disciple.
And then he became
Damodar, yes.
Yeah. Would maybe like to.
Yeah, I'll tell you a story there because there's a story of his conversion and also a story later on where Ramanujacharya used him to teach his brahmacharis and sannyasis a lesson. So there was a big festival in Sri Rangam and the devotees were all there, and there was a very well-to-do man just walking down the street. It's like right at Rath Yatra. It was actually like a Rath Yatra at the temple. The deity is going on procession and completely oblivious to what's going on. He's carrying an umbrella over this very, very attractive young woman, and he can't take his eyes off of this woman. And, kind of a spectacle, especially in those days. You didn't see something like that in public. And Ramanujacharya kind of looked at that, and he actually asked one of his disciples to inquire because he thought it was quite interesting that this man was so absorbed in this woman and courting her or whatever. So one of the disciples asked what the situation was, and they weren't married, and he was courting this woman and so on. And Ramanujacharya said, why don't you invite him to my ashram this evening? And he invited him to the ashram, and he asked the man, he said, what's going on here? He said, well, I've never seen a woman so beautiful in my life, especially her eyes. They're so beautiful. I'm just so captivated. I can't think of anything else. And I worship the ground she walks upon, and I hope she marries me. And Ramanujacharya said, if I could show you someone who has eyes even more beautiful, would you fall in love with them? And he said, of course I would. So that evening they took him to the temple, and the pujaris, I saw this also when I was in Sri Rangam. It's a long story, but when you go to the inner sanctum, it was kind of dark. So the pujaris have these big camphor lamps, and they start at the feet of the deity. He's reclining, a huge deity how huge is Lord Vishnu? He's unlimited, but big deity of Lord Vishnu just lying there. There's a very beautiful face like Govinda or Krishna. But anyways, they start at the feet, illuminating his whole body with his camphor lamp, and then they stop at the face. You can see the beautiful face of Ranganath. And when this gentleman saw the beautiful face of Ranganath, he actually had right then and there, he had a whole change of heart. So anyways, he was initiated by Ramanujacharya and his wife. They got married. The woman was initiated also. And then later on, there's a pastime where there was some fighting and bickering in the ashram. Have you ever seen that happen, Balaram?
Yeah, sometimes. Happened a few times.
So what Ramanujacharya did was their clothing was hanging on the line, so he ripped off a few inches from everyone's dhoti and hid it. And then the sannyasis and brahmacharis woke up and they started yelling and having a big fight. Who ripped my dhoti? Who ripped my dhoti? And then there's the brahmacharis. That's all they have a big fight over their dhotis. And he said, you're all so materialistic. You're all so materialistic. And anyways, what happened is they were criticizing this householder devotee we were just talking about because they're quite well-to-do. And he said, no, actually, he's a very, very saintly person. And I'll prove it to you. He said, I'm going to call him to the ashram tonight. While he's here, I want you to go to his house. And while his wife is sleeping, I want you to go into the house and steal all the jewelry from her body. She won't notice it. She'll be sound asleep. So that's kind of interesting. So they invited this devotee to the ashram for class, and his wife was there. And then later on in the evening, 2 or 3 of the Brahmins, they disguised themselves and they snuck in. Now, she was wide awake during this whole episode, but she was thinking, oh, these Brahmins are so poor, they have to revert to something like this, stealing from other devotees and householders, because they have absolutely nothing. So she was lying there. Now she was lying there on one side. They very carefully removed her bangles and earrings and whatever jewelry she had. And then she was thinking, oh, they got to get the other side. So she rolled over. And when she rolled over, they thought, oh no, she's going to wake up. And they ran out and went back to the ashram. And then Ramanujacharya sent the man home. And he told those Brahmins to wait outside, hide in the bushes, and just see what happens when Damodar comes home. So he comes home, and the wife tells him what happened, that she was lying down, and all of a sudden some Brahmins came in. So she faked it like she was asleep. And I guess they were so poor. And they stole all the jewelry from one side of my body. And I rolled over so I could give them the jewelry from the other side of my body. And he actually chastised her for being for thinking that the jewelry was hers. Said actually it all belongs to the Supreme Lord, and it can all be used in the service of the Lord and the devotees. So they were so pure, not only did they freely give to the devotees, even in a scene like that, but he even caught a little bit of her attachment by thinking, oh no, these are my jewels, and now let me give them to the Brahmins by turning over. So in this way, he showed how detached these two householders were, and how attached the brahmacharis and sannyasis were to their little bit of saffron cloth. So that's the 2 stories I know about this devotee. Is that okay?
Yeah, thank you. What about this? Was it him that was like, so one of his disciples, I think, that kind of like fell away, and then another disciple was asked to go get that disciple who fell away?
That's Jamunacharya.
Oh, okay.
Jamunacharya, when he got half the kingdom, that's a whole story. But when he got half the kingdom and gave up, he was living in the ashram. He got half the kingdom because he won it by winning a debate. That's a wonderful story. And then some years later, one devotee from the ashram, the spiritual master, was hoping he'd come back. So he sent this one devotee every day to the kitchen of the king with a special kind of spinach that Jamunacharya loved when he was living in the ashram. And it's a very special type of spinach that grown in a very holy place. And just by eating it, one can reawaken their Krishna consciousness. So he was coming day after day after day after day. And the cook was making it, and the Jamunacharya was loving it so much and actually having a change of heart. And then it stopped. That sadhu stopped coming to the kitchen, and the king said, what's going on? That spinach is wonderful. I remember having that when I lived in the ashram, and who was bringing it and where is it? And the cook said, well, there's a sadhu who comes to the back door of the palace every day and drops it off at the kitchen. And he said, well, if you see him again, tell him I want to see him. So that's because his devotee knew he just couldn't go into the court and preach to him. He wouldn't listen. He wasn't ready. But his heart became purified by eating this wonderful spinach from the ashram every day. Well, I wish we could get some of that spinach here. Wouldn't that be wonderful? True. And so the devotee, I forget his name, he actually came in and they remembered each other, and he preached to him. And that's when Jamunacharya gave up his attachment to his kingdom and everything and became the great Acharya, Jamunacharya. So I think that's the story you're thinking of. So is Ramapati there? Does he know where we can get that kind of spinach?
I'm not sure if you know. I think Donavari has something.
Yes, Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Thank you, Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Very nice class. Thank you so much. I have a question about when you said you can give I just want to make sure I heard it right. It's if you're very close to the person, then you can give advice. And then one is if you are an authority. Is that advice or the criticize? I didn't hear that.
Yeah,
Prabhu.
there's a line there. Criticism, let's say this, advice may be a better word. You could say criticism, but if there's criticism, it's criticism out of love. Yeah, in the sense of you find a fault and you want to point it out for that person's benefit. Everyone may be able to see that, or many people may be able to see that, but unless you are close to that person or you're their authority, you should not do that. Or unless it's an emergency. That's another thing also. There's an emergency situation, someone's doing something they shouldn't be doing. You can stop them. It's going to hurt someone else physically or emotionally or whatever. That's another thing. But the general course of action, that's the advice. Those are the rules. And if you think about it, just like ourselves, if we're doing something we shouldn't be doing, well, a good close friend of ours who we respect and have affection for, if they talk to us, we're more likely to listen. Or if our natural authorities say something, that's what authorities are there for. They're like teachers, superiors. That's exactly what they're supposed to do. But whenever advice or criticism is given, it should come from the right place. When it comes from the wrong place, it's very unfortunate, and it doesn't work. It actually causes more problems usually than the original problem itself. So that's another thing too. It has to come from the right place and has to be delivered by the appropriate persons. How's that?
Yeah, that sounds good. Sometime we come to in the situation where there's not many authorities, or people are new like me, or if other persons are new, or then we tell them we do it like that or that, just teaching way, not to advise or criticize, but not all the authorities are present always, somewhere in the kitchen or something, then we sometimes, so I don't know, but you are very right about not advising too much. Thank you so much.
If you need someone to yell at you, Balaram's a good person, also Ramapati.
Yes. No, they work hard. They do so much for us. Thank you, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Anything else? Okay. Good, huh? Everyone's happy?
All right. Well, yeah. Thank you very much for.
Sadam, Kirtan?
Well, we had kirtan already, and now talk. So maybe prasadam. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry I couldn't be there to enjoy the prasadam with you, but I'll have to enjoy it via Zoom. Okay.
All right, Jai.
Seeing everyone, and next time Balaram invites me, I'll more than happy to come back if you'll have me. Apparently, next Sunday I'm giving a lecture for the temple in Maui. Just got to
Nice.
So Mohan Vilas.
I gave him your number.
That's fine.
Anyways.
My agent. All glories, all glories, Giridhari.
Jai. Hare Krishna.